On the 7th of April 1945, the tanks of the 4th US Armored Division under General Patton were in Rotem, only 6 kilometers to the southwest of the village of Brettheim, advancing in a southerly direction towards Crailsheim. Most of the Wehrmacht was destroyed and what was left of it was in full retreat. Resistance in the area was only offered by the 13th SS Corps based in Gebstattel, Schillingsfürst and Rottenburg, and since the 24th of October 1944 under the command of SS-Gruppenführer Lieutenant General Max Simon. In Hausen am Bach, 25 Hitler youths, fresh from basic training and probably aged 17 and 18, were housed in the inn. They were under the command of a disabled Wehrmacht NCO called Kurtz, who wanted to let them go home. He called his colleague in Brettheim and asked if he could let them go. Brettheim advised against it, as in theory these Hitler youth were part of the Wehrmacht. Thereupon Kurtz sent 4 of them to Brettheim, suggesting that from there they be allowed to return home. 4 Hitler youths, armed with 3 Panzerfaust bazookas, hand grenades and 1 rifle, arrived in Brettheim to defend the village against the 4th US Armored Division. At this stage, it needs to be clearly understood that whereas the Americans were advancing in a different direction, the German side did not know what their intentions were, and as Patton's troops were only 6 kilometers away, everyone could have expected the village to be attacked at any time. The arrival of the 4 Hitler youths at around 8:30 in the morning caused upset at the Brettheim dairy. Friedrich Hanselmann was a 50-year-old farmer that also headed the local voluntary fire brigade and was a member of the Home Guard, the Volkssturm. When the 4 boys arrived to offer battle in Brettheim with the 4th US Armored Division, he was not very happy. Nor was anyone else. Together with his friend Friedrich Uhl and a group of villagers, after a scuffle which resulted in a shot being fired, he took the weapons from the boys, gave them a slap on the face and sent them back to where they had come from. Then Hanselmann, Uhl and a 15-year-old dairy assistant called Schwarzenberger, amongst others, threw the weapons into the pond on the outskirts of the village. This was also where the voluntary fire brigade got its water from. When the boys returned to Hautzen around 3 kilometers away, the Hitler youth reported to their NCO. He called the Nazi district leadership in Rottenburg, which ordered him to have the weapons removed from the pond. It's hard to believe that the weapons would have been much use after being retrieved from the pond, but in any case, the NCO set off for Brettheim with all of his 25 Hitler youths. In the meantime, the commanding officer, SS General Max Simon, had learned of the incident, presumably via the Nazi Party office in Rothenburg. Simon had a brutal past. In 1934, he was the commandant of the Sachsenberg concentration camp. In November 1943, a Soviet military tribunal sentenced him to death in absentia for his role in the killing of 10,000 Russian civilians in the vicinity of Kharkov in the summer of that year, and he had participated in the mass murders at Sant'Anna di Stazzema and Marzabotto in Italy. He instructed the 34-year-old SS Sturmbannführer Friedrich Uhl to clean up the mess in Brettheim. When the SS arrived in the village, they summoned the residents to the town hall for questioning. Uhl was able to escape because he was warned. Other residents denied responsibility or knowledge of the incident. Meanwhile, Uhl threatened to indiscriminately shoot residents and burn the whole village down if the guilty were not named. As the ringleader, Hanselmann came forward voluntarily to protect the village and its residents. SS-Gruppenführer Gottschalk put together a court-martial with the 63-year-old Leonhard Gagstatter, who had been the mayor since 1910, and the teacher and Nazi Party local group leader, the 42-year-old Leonhard Wolfmeyer, as assistant judges. Gottschalk presided over it. At around 3 in the morning of the 8th of April 1945, Hanselmann and Uhl were sentenced to death by Gottschalk. Gagstatter and Wolfmeyer refused to sign the judgment, which led to them being placed under arrest. At the same time, the 15-year-old Schwarzenberger, who had earlier been allowed to return home, was arrested as an accomplice, transferred via Schillingsfürst to the NSDAP district leadership in Rothenburg, and taken to the prison there. Hanselmann, Wolfmeyer and Gagstatter were also taken under guard to Rothenburg. A new court-martial was convened at Schillingsfürst, which this time included the 35-year-old Wehrmacht Major Ernst Otto and was presided over by Max Simon, who had his command post in the castle. He confirmed the earlier death sentence on Hanselmann and now sentenced Leonhard Wolfmeyer and Leonhard Gagstatter to death for undermining military strength. As the judge, Max Simon also ordered in his handwriting on the sentencing protocol that Hanselmann, Gagstatter and Wolfmeyer should not be executed by shooting but by hanging. On the evening of the 10th of April 1945, tables and chairs were set up by the Hitler Youth under the lime trees at the entrance to the cemetery in Brettheim. A beam was placed between the two lime trees. The villagers initially did not understand what was going on because they had not been informed of the convictions. When they heard about it, they were terrified. Pastor Isler, as a witness in the post-war trials against Simon, Gottschalk and Otto, said that the whole village was paralyzed with horror. The 3 men were hung with signs around their necks that read, "I am the traitor Hanselmann," and with Gagstatter and Wolfmeyer, "I stood in defense of the traitor." The SS further ordered that the corpses could not be removed under the threat of hanging 10 more men who would be chosen at random. It was not until the 4th night that the corpses were allowed to be removed and buried secretly in unnamed graves. In order to terrorize the population, Max Simon had this poster printed in his core area between Crailsheim, Ansbach, Rothenburg and Ingolstadt. The poster says, "The German people are determined to stamp out such cowardly, selfish and negligent traitors with increasing severity and will not shrink from removing their families from the community of the people fighting in honor." There are 5 names on it. As well as the 3 men who were hanged in Brettheim, there's a 4th man from Brettheim, Uhl, who managed to escape from the SS after being warned what was happening. The first name on the list is that of Volkssturmmann Rößler. Johann Rößler was a market gardener from Rothenburg who at the age of 49 and ill with a foot complaint that dated to his service in the First World War, deserted from the Volkssturm near Frankfurt an der Oder in February 1945 and fled home. Despite being warned to hide, he insisted on remaining at home where he was captured. After a brief court-martial and death sentence, Simon had Rößler shot against the cemetery wall in Rothenburg. This sign in the cemetery now recalls what happened. The message was therefore absolutely clear. The families of those who wanted to protect their villages and the inhabitants of their villages were also in danger. None of this stopped the advance of the 4th US Armored Division once it decided to advance towards Brettheim. At around 8 in the morning of the 17th of April 1945, the Americans called on the mayor and the population to show white flags. However, as the SS had declared that Brettheim was the cornerstone of German defence, and the village was now being defended by mountain troops, no white flags were shown. At around 9 in the morning, the US artillery opened fire. At around 11:45, fighter bombers using incendiaries and fragmentation bombs attacked, resulting in the deaths of 18 people and the destruction of almost all of the village. The following day, a German naval Werfer opened fire on the now liberated village, causing more loss of life and damage. Now, from a military point of view, there could have been some sense in defending Brettheim. Indeed, it could have been the cornerstone of the defence had the Wehrmacht possessed the resources to do so. However, all it had on offer on the 7th of April 1945 were 4 Hitler Youth armed with 3 bazookas and 1 rifle. But this was the fairy tale world the Nazi leadership was living in, one of fanciful wonder weapons. And if only one had the belief that all could turn around, then perhaps all could turn around. Max Simon did not practice what he preached. At the end of the war, he surrendered, and we have this photograph of him negotiating, giving up with the Americans. To that end, we see the white armband he is wearing, a sign that he is attempting to surrender and is negotiating it. After liberation, German courts were restricted as to what National Socialist crimes could be tried by them. The Control Council Act No. 4 of the 20th of October 1945 on the restructuring of the German judiciary made it possible for German courts to prosecute crimes of the Nazi era, but only to a limited extent. Crimes against nationals of the Allies were initially not allowed to be prosecuted. The Allied military authorities still reserved this area for themselves. Cases related to the deaths of Allied nationals were to be tried by the competent military authorities of those countries. However, crimes against the German people could be tried. In the summer of 1948, the public prosecutor in Ansbach launched an investigation. On the 15th of May 1951, the district court in Ansbach refused to open formal proceedings. On the 7th of December 1951, the Bavarian Supreme Court overruled the decision. After the war, Max Simon was sentenced to death by a British court in Padova for mass murders committed in Italy. This was commuted to life imprisonment in 1948, and he was released in 1954. He could not be tried for the same offence twice, but as the Brettheim killings were not on the earlier charge sheet, the German judiciary could now put him on trial. On the 5th of March 1954, proceedings were initiated, which the Ansbach District Court discontinued on the 15th of October 1954. This was overturned by the Bavarian Supreme Court on the 4th of May 1955. A trial was held of Max Simon, Friedrich Gottschalk and the Wehrmacht Major Ernst Otto from the 6th to the 19th of October 1955 in Ansbach, which ended in an acquittal due to lack of evidence. The same court ruling applied to the execution of Johann Rößler in Rothenburg. The Ansbach jury said, taking into account the military aspects, the death penalty cannot seem to be harsher than any other reasonable measure that was available at the time. The Ansbach judges also said about the victims, the death of the 4 men sentenced in 1945 by the court-martial is to be deeply regretted because they were people who went about their work honestly and diligently in civil life. They were late victims of that unfortunate war. The Ansbach judges also noted that Simon had saved the medieval town of Rothenburg from the main battle line and had allowed himself to be persuaded to refrain from blowing up the bridges in Munich. In the first instance, this is a far fanciful claim. The preservation of Rothenburg had more to do with another military commander than that of the SS general who no doubt would have allowed the town to have been destroyed. The head judge was Andreas Schmidt, who had joined the Nazi Party in 1927 and had made a career in the judiciary in the Third Reich. The public prosecutor had requested prison sentences of 2 to 6 years. The acquittal was justified with the argument that the court-martial judgments were formally correct. On the 7th of December 1956, the First Criminal Division of the Federal Court of Justice overturned the judgment of the Ansbach Jury Court and referred the case to the District Court at Nuremberg-Fürth. A trial was held from the 12th of March to the 23rd of April 1958. The ruling here was, unfortunately, the question of whether Hanselmann and his comrades had weakened German military strength cannot be answered. Simon, Gottschalk and Otto were acquitted again. Once more, the First Criminal Division of the Federal Court of Justice overturned the judgment on the 30th of June 1959 and referred the case back to the Ansbach Regional Court. On the 23rd of July 1960, Gottschalk, then a business person in Augsburg, received 3 years and 6 months in prison. Former Army Major Ernst Otto, by then a municipal employee in Münster, who, in the words of the court, at best could be certified as having a lack of moral courage towards the SS, but who could not be blamed for a conviction in a lower court, was acquitted. SS General Simon was once more acquitted for lack of evidence. Another trial was planned to be held in Lünen in North Rhine-Westphalia in 1961. Simon was then working in an insurance company in Dortmund. The trial did not go ahead, as former SS General Max Simon died of heart failure on the 1st of February 1961, aged 62.